Hey, welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. Feels a bit like flipping through an old photo album every time you return. Familiar, comforting, and full of stories. I hope today brought you something to smile about. Let me know where you're tuning in from. It's always nice to hear where our little echoes reach. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and stay a while. Now, let's get into it. I didn't go looking for monsters, but the forest knew we were coming, and it was watching. It started with a whisper from a local Ojibwe man the moment we landed. "Don't knock. If it knocks first, I laughed then. But I shouldn't have. We thought it was just a hunting trip. 4 guys. No cell service. Deep in the Ontario woods. But every night, something circled the cabin. Not threatening. Not friendly. Just judging. When we left food out, it disappeared. Bones came back, arranged like an offering. And when one of us killed a deer that didn't run, we woke up to the meat, returned, untouched, along with a hand-carved stone. I spent my life believing compassion was a human thing, but the eyes I saw at the tree line said otherwise. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to warn you. If there's something still untouched out there, something older than our myths, it doesn't need your fear. It wants your respect. And if it lets you leave, that means you passed its test. They told me the cabin was remote. They said it like a joke, with a grin and a slap on the back. "You'll love it out there, Cal," Reed said. "No traffic, no email, just trees, air, and maybe some moose if we're lucky." I nodded, not because I believed him, but because I needed to believe in something quieter than what I had been living with. The flight out was early. We left from a seaplane base just past Wapika, where the roads turned to gravel and the language changed at the gas station. An Ojibwe man refueled the plane. He didn't look at me when he said it, just mumbled it into the wind. "If you hear 2 knocks, don't knock back." I laughed, awkwardly. He didn't. The pilot, Leonard, was thin and leathery, the kind of man who'd seen a few things and didn't talk unless you asked. Even then, you regretted asking. He said he hadn't flown to Hayes Lake in over a year, not since the last storm took down a corner of the cabin roof. "Some places don't like to be disturbed too often," he muttered. From the air, the forest looked endless, dark green stretching in every direction like a sea of silence. Hayes Lake appeared like a mirror, still and black under the wing. As we descended, I lifted my phone and snapped a picture through the window. Later, when I looked at it again, there was something just left of the tree line. A shape. Nothing definite, nothing you could swear to in court. But it was there. Hayes was already waiting at the dock. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard gone half white and a hat that looked older than me. He didn't talk much, just nodded once, and helped us unload. The cabin sat on a ridge, maybe 70 yards back from the water, wrapped in pine and shadow. It was built solid, old beams, new patchwork. You could still see where the roof had been torn open years ago. Hayes said the storm took it. He didn't say it convincingly. Inside, it smelled like pine tar and cold metal. A potbelly stove in the corner, beds lined against the far wall, and a mounted caribou skull above the fireplace. Hayes showed us the water pump, old, rusted, temperamental, and the generator behind the shed that needed coaxing to run. He moved with the silence of someone used to being ignored by the forest. Reed called it peaceful. I called it unnerving. After dinner, canned chili, thick bread, beer warm from the cooler. Hayes told us the story. "It happened winter of '98, he said, without ceremony. Roof ripped clean off. No wind damage anywhere else. No tracks except some kind of print near the back steps. Big, not bare, not human. Just one, like it stepped there to be seen. I waited for the punchline. Reed didn't laugh. Neither did Hayes. He stood and pointed to a frame on the far wall. Behind the glass, a photo. Blurry, black and white. Looked like snow, trees, nothing else. But then I saw it, a shape, hunched, long-armed, nearly blending into the birch trunks. My chest tightened. Hayes didn't say the word, not that night, but it didn't matter. We all knew what he meant. Reed told me to get some rest. Tomorrow, Daniel and Liam would arrive. "We'll plan the hunt proper then," he said. I nodded, but sleep didn't come easy. The cot was stiff, the wind louder than I'd expected, scraping along the eaves like fingernails. And underneath it all, the quiet felt too thick. Like the air itself didn't want to carry sound too far. I got up around 3 a.m., couldn't say why. Maybe a dream, maybe just nerves. I walked to the front window and looked out toward the trees. Nothing moved. But there was a stillness to the dark that felt too deliberate, too alert. My breath fogged a glass. Then something flickered at the edge of vision. Nothing clear. Just a shift in black on black, like a shoulder turning behind a tree. I blinked hard. It was gone. The next morning, Leonard dropped off Daniel and Liam. More laughter, more stories, louder voices pushing back the weight in the air. Liam unpacked a recording device and set it on the porch. "Just want to catch some ambient forest noise," he said. "Helps me sleep." Daniel cracked a beer before noon and called us all soft for looking jumpy. "It's the woods, fellas, not Mars." But Hayes didn't laugh. He stood near the tree line, staring into the trees like someone waiting for a reply. I joined him for a moment. Neither of us said a word. When the wind shifted, I caught the faintest whiff of something. Wet, metallic, almost sweet like rotting fruit, but sharper. It was gone in a second, but I saw Hayes stiffen. "Smell that?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "You'll smell it again," he said. "But don't go looking for where it comes from. Things out here don't like being followed." That night, as the others drank and talked by the fire, I stepped back outside with my phone and opened the photo I'd taken from the plane. I zoomed in. That shape, whatever it was facing away from the lake. But now I saw something new. A second shape, smaller, crouched near the base of a tree, almost entirely hidden. I felt the cold move through my shirt like breath. When I looked up from the screen, the forest looked different. Not darker, not louder, just aware. I turned and went back inside, but I didn't shut the door right away. I left it cracked. Just enough for something, or someone, to see that we weren't hiding. Not yet. They arrived a little after noon, their plane touching down on the lake with a hiss that cut through the stillness. Daniel stepped out first, laughing before his boots even hit the dock. He carried a cooler in one hand, a compound bow slung over his shoulder, and the kind of confidence that made the trees feel smaller. Liam followed, quiet as always, with a canvas pack across his chest and a digital recorder already clipped to his collar. He didn't say much, just looked around slowly, like he was taking inventory of something nobody else saw. Reed and I helped them haul gear up the ridge, while Hayes lingered behind, eyes on the tree line again. The air had that brittle sharpness that only northern forests seem to carry. Thin, cold, clean in a way that left you feeling exposed. Once we had everything inside, Daniel cracked a beer and declared the hunt officially underway, even though none of us had taken a shot yet. Liam, meanwhile, disappeared out back, trailing wires and motion sensors like breadcrumbs. That night, over venison jerky and beans, the five of us gathered around the stove and started mapping out the terrain. Hayes pulled out a folded topo map, the edges soft from years of handling. He marked a nearby bog with a red pen, circled a ravine to the north, and tapped a place he called the Cut. A narrow saddle between ridgelines, said to be a game funnel. Moose like the elevation there, he said, and bears hate the wind that runs through it. We decided to split into pairs starting the next morning. Me and Reed, Daniel with Hayes, and Liam setting up sound lures and thermal cams on his own. We wouldn't start tracking anything until the full group was ready. Fair was fair. And besides, something about this trip made everyone feel like it was better to move together. That night was colder. The wind picked up in sudden bursts that rattled the windows and made the walls groan like an old man shifting in his sleep. I couldn't get warm, no matter how many layers I pulled over myself. Around 2:30, I sat up, thirsty and restless, and padded barefoot to the kitchen sink. That's when I noticed the window. There, in the fogged glass, was a smear. Long, vertical, 4 wide fingers, and no visible thumb. I stared at it too long. It wasn't just the size, though it was large enough to make me feel 10 years old again. It was the clarity. No smudge, no distortion. Whoever or whatever had left it had done so slowly, deliberately, like it wanted me to know it had been there. My throat dried. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't even wipe it away. I just turned the faucet off without drinking and went back to my cot, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, Liam was the first to speak. He looked tired, almost hollow, said he'd stayed up monitoring his recording equipment. "I got something," he said. "Low-frequency pulses way below human hearing. Like pressure waves. You don't hear it in real time, but you feel it." He looked at me like he wasn't sure I'd believe him. It came through around 3:12. 4 hits, almost rhythmic. Hayes leaned forward. Like knocks, more like breathing, but thick. Like something huge letting air out slowly through its nose. You can hear trees creaking between them. Liam pressed play. The cabin went quiet. A low hiss filled the room, then dipped into something deeper, sub-bass and oppressive. It made my chest tighten just listening to it. 4 distinct exhalations. Then, silence. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Daniel, finally, scoffed. "Could be elk. Hell, even a moose can grunt like that when it's cold enough." Liam shook his head. "Not from that far. Not that consistent." Reed stood up, rubbing his beard. "Could have been wind. Could have been something else." Hayes looked at me. "You see anything last night?" I paused, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't know what it meant to say it out loud. "There was a handprint," I said quietly, "on the kitchen window." Hayes didn't look surprised. He just nodded once. "Did it have a thumb?" "No." "Then it's the same one that touched the back glass in 98, he said. Daniel laughed. "But it wasn't full-hearted." "What the hell doesn't have a thumb?" Hayes didn't answer. Liam did. Some of the older reports, Alaskan, British Columbia. They described large primate tracks without a clear opposable digit. Not bear, not ape. Something else. Daniel took a long drink and walked outside. Hayes watched him go, but didn't follow. He just reached under the stove and pulled out an old wooden box, handed it to Liam. Inside were cassette tapes, brittle with age, marked with dates going back decades. "My brother used to keep field recordings," he said. Before he stopped coming here. Liam lifted one, held it to the light. "What happened to him?" "Left in the middle of the night," Hayes said. "Didn't pack, didn't write, just left. Never came back. No one spoke for a long while after that." The fire hissed low in the stove, and outside, the wind had gone quiet again. That same too-perfect silence. The kind that doesn't feel earned. Like something's been bought at a price you didn't realize you paid. That evening, I tried to make myself feel normal. Walked out to the dock just before sundown. Watched the lake shift orange under the dying sky. The surface was perfectly still. Not even a ripple, but the hairs on my neck stood up like I'd stepped into static. Then I saw it. Barely a shift in the trees, maybe 70 yards up the ridge. Not movement, exactly. Just a presence, the kind of thing you don't catch with your eyes, but with your skin. I didn't run. I just stood there, because part of me, some stupid, stubborn, scared part, wanted to know if it would show itself. Wanted to know if it had been watching all along, but nothing came out. Nothing stepped forward. Only the wind returned, and the sound of my own breath, and the soft, uneven tick of Liam's recorder spinning in my chest pocket. Still running. That night, I didn't close the curtains. I wanted it to know that I knew. I left the recorder on the window ledge. No lights. Just me, the dark, and whatever was out there, listening. The third morning started with a darkness that felt heavier than usual. Not just early dark, but something weighted. The kind that hangs low in your chest before your feet ever touch the floor. I woke up before the others, boots already at the door. Reed and I had agreed to hit the East Bog at first light. And even though I hadn't slept more than 3 hours, I felt the itch to move, the kind of urgency you can't explain, like being watched through your dreams and needing to step outside just to shake it off. Reed handed me a thermos and nodded toward the tree line. We didn't talk much. The walk was quiet except for the crunch of frost under our boots and the soft pop of frozen needles breaking underfoot. The forest around us felt like a held breath. Still, but not calm. As if it was waiting for something, we followed the ridge south, cut through the tall grass, and made it to the bog by 6:15. The sky was bleeding pale blue above the trees, the sun still tucked behind the mountains. Mist hugged the edges of the water, curling around reeds like fingers dragging across glass. We picked a spot along a knoll that overlooked a small clearing, the kind of place Reed called Moose Charming. I set down my pack, adjusted the scope on my borrowed rifle, and tried to settle into the cold. The wind was light, drifting from the east. Perfect for a sit. We didn't speak. That was something I liked about Reed. He didn't feel the need to fill silence just because it was there. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Then the smell hit. It wasn't strong at first, more like a shift in the air, like walking into a room where something's been left too long under heat. But then it deepened. Wet, sour, metallic, like rotting meat soaked in stagnant water. I pulled my neck gaiter up, but it didn't help. Reed turned slightly toward me, not saying a word, but I could see his face tense. He'd smelled it too. I scanned the trees. Nothing moved. No birds. No chipmunks darting through the underbrush. No breeze. Just that smell, lingering like smoke after a fire that shouldn't have started. Then, slowly, it faded. Not all at once. It just sort of retracted, as if it had been pulled back. Recalled, Reed clicked on his radio and whispered something to Hayes. Static. No reply. He tried again. Still nothing. He looked at me, jaw tight, and nodded once toward the tree line. We waited another 15 minutes. Nothing stirred. Let's move, he muttered. And we did, following the dry side of the bog back toward the cabin. The smell didn't come back, but the silence stayed thick. When we made it to the clearing near the dock, Liam was crouched on the edge of the platform, adjusting his equipment. "You guys smell anything weird out there?" he asked without looking up. Reed nodded. "Rotting flesh, wet dog copper?" Liam just said, "Same," and held up a small recorder. "And I got this." He hit play. At first, there was nothing. Just wind, the occasional static hiss. Then a pulse, low, drawn out, vibrating through the cheap speaker. It sounded like breath, but longer, deeper. Not animal. Not anything I'd heard before. Another exhale followed, and then another. Each one slightly off rhythm, like something pacing its own heartbeat. "There's no filter," Liam said. "That's just raw audio. I was aiming to pick up frog calls, and this cut in right before 7 a.m. I took the recorder from him. The sound hit harder up close, like it pressed against the skin behind your ears. I found myself holding my breath, like matching it might summon something. When I handed it back, my palms were sweating. Later that afternoon, we tried fishing. Daniel had already caught 2 trout by the time I sat down at the end of the dock. I had to focus on the water, let it pull the morning out of me. But my hands wouldn't stay still. Every snap of a branch from the forest behind made me flinch. The trees felt closer somehow. Not physically, but in presence. Like they knew something I didn't. Like they remembered me from that night at the window. Daniel was in the middle of a story about nearly falling into a pit trap in Utah when Reed's radio crackled. Movement near the ridge. Hayes' voice came through, low and calm. North tree line. Big. Reed looked at me, then back at the woods. We both stood. I picked up my scope and scanned the edge where the trees thickened. For a second, nothing. And then... something. A shape. Not running, not walking. Just still. It was huge. Taller than the pine it stood beside, though hunched forward. Shoulders like boulders. Arms too long to be human. Dark reddish fur catching shafts of dying light like copper wire. It didn't move, just stood there. And then, the worst part, it turned. Not its whole body. Just its head, slowly, the way a person might if they already knew you were watching. I swear it looked right at me. Across the field, across the lake, through the lens. It didn't blink. I dropped the scope. My stomach flipped like I'd been punched from inside. I turned to Reed, and he was already lowering his rifle. "Back," he said. "Now." We didn't run. We just walked, fast, quiet, too careful, and got back to the cabin without saying a word. That night, Liam played back the audio from his second unit. Same breathing. Same pacing rhythm. But this time, just before it ended, a sound broke through it never forget. 3 deliberate knocks. Not from wood. Not from tools. From something hard. Thick. Alive. Reed didn't say much the rest of the night. None of us did. I lay on my cot with the recorder still on the ledge by the window. I kept thinking about how that thing moved. Not like it was hiding. Not like it was hunting. Just there. Aware. Present. The kind of thing that didn't need to prove it existed. It just waited for us to notice. By the time the 4th night came around, something in all of us had changed. Not just the way we moved. Slower now. Or the way we spoke. Softer, like voices might travel farther than we wanted them to. It was the way we avoided the windows after dusk. How our eyes lingered longer on the woods, even when we told ourselves there was nothing there. That night, the fire crackled a little louder than usual, like it was trying to fill in for the silence growing between us. Daniel told stories. Loud, whining things about elk too dumb to run, women too smart to chase. But even he couldn't hold the room like he used to. There was something hollow in his laughter now. Like a man trying to whistle in the dark and forgetting the tune halfway through. We were circled around the fire pit outside the cabin, beer bottles in the snow, Liam with his headphones around his neck for once. The flames lit our faces but left the trees behind us in pitch. The air carried that metallic edge again. Faint, but there. And the smoke rose slowly, like it didn't want to leave. Hayes sat nearest the edge, his back to the woods, like always. I don't think he did it out of bravery, more like he didn't want to give it the satisfaction of seeing his fear. At some point, I stepped away. I don't remember deciding to. 1 minute I was watching Liam tune his recorder levels, and the next I was walking toward the tree line, just beyond the circle of firelight. Something pulled at me, not with sound or sight, but like a rope around the ribs. The snow crunched under my boots, and the further I got from the others, the quieter their voices became. I stopped at the edge, right where the trees began to swallow the light, and I just stood there. That's when I felt it. Not cold, not wind. It was still, but I felt it on my face like pressure. The kind you feel in the moments before thunder cracks. Thick. Suspended. My heart started beating faster. I don't know if I heard something or sensed it, but I turned slowly to my left, and there it was. Eyes. Not glowing. Not dramatic. Just there. 2 red orbs sitting too far apart, too high off the ground to be anything I understood. They didn't blink. They didn't narrow. They just watched me. Not like prey. Not like a threat. More like a question. Like it was waiting to see what I would do. I didn't move. Couldn't. I remember telling myself to look away. To step back. To scream if I had to. But nothing came. I stood frozen. And it just stood there, maybe 20 yards into the trees. Hidden except for those eyes. Then, slowly, it shifted, just enough to break the illusion of stillness. Its head tilted slightly, and I could feel it, really feel it, reading me. Behind me, someone called my name. I couldn't tell who. The voice broke something loose in me. I blinked. Just once, when I opened my eyes again, the red was gone. The trees were just trees. I stumbled back toward the fire, not caring who saw the panic on my face. Liam stood first, headphones already around his ears again, eyes scanning. "What did you see?" he asked. I didn't answer. Reed walked with me back inside. He didn't ask anything. He didn't have to. He'd seen my face. Later that night, we checked the audio logs. Liam's secondary recorder, the one he'd left pointed toward the tree line, had caught something. Not breathing this time. Not knocking. Just the absence of everything. A moment, 28 seconds long, where the forest background dropped out entirely. No insects. No wind. No crackling branches. Like the world had gone still in the middle of a breath it never finished. And under that silence, faint but there, a low tone. Like a hum, buried deep. Reed said it sounded like a foghorn underwater. Hayes said it reminded him of the silence right before a snow shelf gives way. But what made me shiver, what made my gut twist, was that it lasted exactly as long as I was standing at the edge of the trees. We went back out just before bed, all 5 of us. No one said it out loud, but we needed to see. Reed carried a flashlight, sweeping slow arcs through the trees. At first, nothing. But then, Liam stopped. At the base of one of the pines, wedged into the frozen ground, was a sapling. Not planted, not growing, placed. Its roots had been cut clean, the dirt around it packed too tight, like something large had forced it there. It stood upright, balanced, a kind of totem. Its top had been stripped of needles, and the bark carved shallow, 3 horizontal notches. Liam didn't speak. He just took a picture, then stepped back. Hayes looked at it a long time. "That's not for us," he said. Reed muttered something under his breath, but I only caught the end. Warning. We didn't sleep much that night. The fire inside the stove snapped and hissed, but the room never felt warm. I lay awake, thinking about those eyes. How calm they were. Not aggressive, not afraid. Just patient, measured. I couldn't shake the sense that it hadn't come closer because it didn't need to. It already knew us, and now we knew it knew. The next morning was quieter than any before. Not just in sound, but in mood. It felt like none of us wanted to acknowledge what had happened the night before. Like naming it might give it roots. Reed sharpened his blade in slow, rhythmic pulls across the whetstone. Daniel chopped wood he didn't need, and Liam disappeared into his own thoughts and his gear. Hayes stood on the back porch for over an hour, not moving, watching the same patch of trees where we'd found the planted sapling. I tried to focus on something simple. Fishing. Just movement, breath, line, and water. I took my rod down to the dock while the others stayed near the cabin. The lake shimmered with that false calm again, glassy but cold, and the air smelled faintly like pine and something sour beneath it, something low and hidden. I cast out and let the silence do whatever it wanted. After about 40 minutes, I'd pulled in 2 solid trout and tied them off with paracord at the end of the dock, leaving them in the water to stay fresh. I stayed there longer than I should have, maybe hoping for something to shift, maybe daring it to. I don't remember the exact moment I stood up to leave, but when I reached the rope, the fish were gone. Not ripped. Not half-eaten, and the knot I'd tied was still intact, perfectly cinched, like it had never been disturbed at all. I scanned the trees. Nothing. The water barely rippled. But on the far end of the dock, just past the last board, something had been left behind. It was a fish spine. Clean. White. picked so thoroughly it looked almost surgical. No blood, no gore. Just laid there neatly, the head still attached and the eyes still in place. And next to it, balanced with the care of someone who knew exactly how it would be seen, was a river stone. Smooth. Flat. Dry. I backed away. Not because I was afraid. Though I was. But because something about the placement made it feel like I was looking at an altar. Or a response. I left it untouched. When I told the others, no one laughed. Not even Daniel. Hayes listened, then nodded once and said, "It's been a long time since it's done that." He didn't explain what he meant. Later, while cleaning gear on the porch, Liam quietly said, "Maybe we try giving something back." Reed looked skeptical, but didn't object. Hayes didn't say anything, which by then was the closest thing we had to a yes. That night, we wrapped one of the fish we'd caught in wax paper, tied it off in twine, and placed it on the flat stump near the edge of the tree line. The same spot where the sapling had been found. We didn't wait around. We didn't watch. We went inside, shut the door, and let the dark decide what came next. The wind was restless that night. It rattled the window frames and hissed through the cracks like it was trying to speak but couldn't form words. No knocks. No breathing. Just that same pressure in the air, the one that made your shoulders tense without you knowing it. Around 2 a.m., I couldn't sleep. Again. I got up, stepped into my boots, and cracked the front door open. I didn't use a flashlight. I didn't need to. There was enough moonlight spilling through the pines to show me what had changed. The stump was empty. The wrapped fish was gone. And just beyond it, half buried in the snow, was something else. A single tree branch, maybe 4 feet long, sharpened at one end like a stake. Its bark had been stripped away in a spiral pattern. On one side, carved shallow and deliberate, were 3 short horizontal lines, identical to the markings we'd seen on the sapling. I stood there for a long time, cold creeping through my socks, watching the edge of the woods. Then I felt it, not saw, not heard, felt. The shift of weight in air. The kind of presence that doesn't need sound to be undeniable. It stood just past the second row of trees, the same shape I'd seen through the scope. Shoulders like columns, head tilted forward. No glowing eyes this time, no motion. Just there. Solid. Unmistakable. Like it had always been. And I did something I didn't think I'd ever do. I raised my hand. Not fast, just enough. A breath passed between. It didn't move, not a twitch. But the pressure in the air shifted again, like something loosening. A release. Then it turned, not away but to the side, and walked deeper into the trees. Not rushed. Snow didn't crunch. It moved the way rivers do. Inevitable, quiet, too big to hold in one thought. I stayed there until my feet went numb. The next morning, Liam checked the recorder we'd left facing the stump. We played it back in silence. It caught the wind, the soft drag of something heavy over snow. And then, just once, a grunt. Low, deep, not threatening, almost questioning. I watched Reed listen to it, the way his jaw flexed and then relaxed. He said nothing, but I could tell. Whatever walls he'd kept up since arriving had just cracked a little wider. Hayes came up behind us, handed me a mug of coffee, and said quietly, "You give a piece, it gives one back." I asked him if he really believed that. He didn't answer. But he didn't have to. Because The sky was pale and bruised when we set out that morning, the kind of half-light that made the snow seem grayer than white. We hadn't spoken much over breakfast. I don't think any of us were avoiding the subject so much as we'd all quietly agreed not to poke at whatever balance had settled over the cabin in the last day or two. The fish had been taken, the branch left behind. Something had responded, and we didn't know yet whether it was a yes or a warning. Daniel wanted to head northeast. He'd spotted what he thought was a bedding area the day before. Past the ridge where the lake narrowed, Hayes gave a nod, but his mouth was a flat line. Reed asked me if I wanted to go with them or stay near the cabin. I chose to stay. Something in my chest told me we shouldn't all be gone at once. By mid-morning, the trees felt different. I can't explain how a place can feel emptier and more crowded at the same time, but that's what it was. Liam stayed back with me, recalibrating a new parabolic mic near the edge of the dock. He'd stopped speculating out loud. Now he just worked in silence, adjusting dials, checking batteries, writing things down in a little green notebook with a pencil worn to the metal. I watched the tree line more than I watched the lake. A little after noon. The first shot cracked, sharp, directional, Daniel's rifle. Then a second, a breath apart. I looked at Liam. His expression didn't change, but he stood. We both listened, waiting. A third shot came about 10 seconds later, farther off. We took off up the ridge, boots slipping in packed snow, breathing hard. My ribs ached by the time we reached the clearing Daniel had pointed out earlier in the trip. Reed was already there, crouched near the base of a tree, rifle lower. The bull moose lay in the snow about 15 feet away, 2 rounds through the shoulder, another through the side. It hadn't moved far. It looked too perfect. That was the first thing I noticed. No struggle, no churned snow or broken branches, just stillness, posed like a taxidermy display. Like it had been waiting. Daniel stood a little apart, hands on his hips, looking down at the kill with an expression I couldn't place. It wasn't pride. It wasn't guilt either. It was confusion. Was it moving? I asked. He shook his head. No. Just standing there, like it didn't care. Hayes came up behind us a few minutes later, eyes flicking between the body and our faces. He didn't speak. Reed had already started field dressing the moose, working in quick, practiced motions. I helped where I could, though my hands felt clumsy. We strapped the quarters onto the sled and headed back in silence. None of us wanted to say what we were thinking. It had been too easy. Back at the cabin, the temperature dropped quickly, the way it does when snow is thinking about falling. The wind picked up again around dusk, rattling the stovepipe and whistling under the floorboards. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to see what we'd do next, that we'd taken more than we should have. Then came the knocks, 3, hard and slow, from the back of the cabin, against the wall, not the door. We all froze. Then another, closer, louder, deliberate. We moved without speaking. Hayes grabbed the rifle by the door. Liam pressed his ear against the wall. I held my breath. No footsteps, no voices, just silence and then another knock. So close it made the window glass tremble. Reed cracked the door open just enough to peer through. He didn't open it wider. He just closed it again slowly and locked it. There's nothing there, he said. But his face said something different. It said maybe he hadn't been looking at nothing, exactly. We didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I walked the perimeter. Found prints, huge ones, 12 inches wide. Bare, but not human. 5 toes. No claw marks. Just deep impressions that stopped 5 feet from the porch like it had stood there and watched for a while. Beside one of the steps, right where I'd dropped my gloves the day before, was a piece of meat. Not thrown. Placed. It was the rear flank of the moose. Still fresh. Still clean. As if it had been returned. I called Reed over. He looked down at the meat. Then at the trees. It doesn't want all of it, he said. Just a part. Liam crouched beside the print and took out his recorder. He didn't hit play. He just set it down gently on the snow and left it running. That afternoon, we tried again, this time intentionally. We left another quarter near the stump, wrapped in canvas, anchored with a stone. Then we waited. At midnight, the wind died. Completely. The kind of still that presses against your ears, makes the world feel too quiet. We heard a single exhale. Just one. Deep and vibrating, almost mournful. Then nothing. In the morning, the meat was gone. The stone we'd placed to hold it down had been moved 3 feet to the left and turned on its side. Nothing else had been touched. That's when I realized we hadn't just crossed a line. We'd been invited to understand one, but only if we didn't push further. By the 7th day, it wasn't just the woods that had changed. It was us. Something about the silence around that cabin had sunk beneath our skin, made us softer in the way we moved, more deliberate with our choices. We no longer joked the way we had, not out of fear, but out of a strange kind of respect. The kind that settles in once you realize you're not the only thing standing upright in the dark. That morning, I found myself awake before the others, sitting alone at the edge of the porch with a tin mug that had long gone cold. I stared into the trees where the snow still hadn't melted beneath the thick canopies. I kept wondering when exactly we'd gone from looking for signs of something to waiting for it to return. That shift had happened without any real discussion, but we all felt it. Later, Reed asked me to walk with him. Just the two of us. We followed the trail down to the spot where we'd quartered the moose a couple days before. It was quiet. No birds, no breeze. Just that soft pressure of something nearby, but not yet revealed. We didn't talk for the first half-mile. Just walked side by side until we reached the clearing where the last piece of the moose had been left. It was gone, of course. But the snow around it told a different story this time. The prints weren't just clear. They were deliberate. Path of 5 massive steps that circled the stump once, paused at its base, then led back into the woods in a line so clean it might have been made by human hands. If human hands belonged to something 10 feet tall. Reed crouched low near the first print. He didn't touch it. He just looked. I shot one of them, he said quietly, almost to himself. I didn't answer. Years ago? British Columbia? Wasn't supposed to be there. I thought it was a bear at first, but it stood up. And he broke off, jaw tightening. I didn't aim to kill. I just panicked. Thing didn't fall, just stood there. Looked at me, then turned and walked off. He looked at me then, really looked. I couldn't sleep for weeks after that. Still can't, sometimes. I asked if he'd ever told anyone. Hayes, he said. And now you. We stood in that clearing a little longer, surrounded by quiet and snow and the weight of an old mistake neither of us could undo. There was no judgment between us, just the shared understanding that we were guests in a place that didn't have to let us stay. That afternoon, Daniel hauled in another moose, though none of us had expected him to. He hadn't said where he was going, and when he showed up dragging the quartered parts on a sled, Reed's face said more than any words could. Not anger, not pride. Just a slow, tight nod that meant everything and nothing. We decided to keep only half and offer the rest. Not as a bribe, not as an apology, just because it felt right. At dusk, we wrapped the hindquarter in fresh canvas and laid it out by the same stump. This time, we didn't leave a stone. We didn't carve anything. We just stepped back and let the stillness take over again. It came just after midnight. There was no knock this time. No breath against the walls. No movement we could see. But the back door creaked, not all the way open, just enough to let cold spill in through the frame. And then, from beyond the fire's glow, a shadow passed the window. Wide, tall, slow. I didn't move. None of us did. I could feel my own heart pounding in my throat, feel the pull of every instinct telling me to run, to shut the door, to pretend none of this was happening. But instead, I stood. I stepped forward, slowly. Deliberately, I opened the door wider, just enough to show I wasn't hiding. It was there, at the edge of the trees, watching. Not angry, not afraid. Its shoulders were hunched slightly, arms long and bent at the elbows, hands hanging low. The moonlight caught the edges of its face, but not its eyes. Those stayed in shadow. Still, I knew they were locked on me. I didn't say a word, I just gave a slow nod and placed something at the threshold. A small carving I'd made earlier that day. Nothing fancy. Just a cedar figure, 4 inches tall, shaped like a man with no face and arms outstretched. I'd sanded it smooth with the back of my knife, my offering. The creature didn't move. It just stood there as if measuring something I couldn't name. Then, finally, it turned, slow and easy, and disappeared back into the woods. No sound, no broken twigs, nothing but air reclaiming the space it left behind. I stayed there until the wind returned. In the morning, the figure was gone. In its place, buried just beneath the snow line, was a tuft of hair, coarse, reddish-brown, thick as wire. And next to it, half pressed into the earth, a stone smoothed flat and etched with 3 clean notches. Not scratched, not accidental, marked. I showed it to Hayes. He held it in both hands for a long while and said only, "That means something." He didn't know what. Neither did I, but I felt it. Whatever line had been between us, it had moved, shifted, not erased, but softened. And I had the distinct feeling that whatever lived out there in the trees, whatever had watched us and waited and warned and chosen not to strike, it didn't just know who we were now. It remembered. We packed up slow that morning, not because we were tired, though we were, not because the cold had gotten into our joints, though it had. It was something else. The weight of leaving a place that had allowed you in without ever promising it would. That kind of weight doesn't sit on your back. It sits in your chest. I felt it as I rolled my sleeping bag, as I zipped up the gear I'd barely touched, as I stepped through the doorway one last time and looked back at the stove we'd gathered around every night, pretending we weren't waiting for something to knock. Again, Reed was the first to say what we were all thinking. Feels like we're leaving something behind. He didn't mean gear. He didn't mean meat. He meant something quieter, something none of us had the words for. Liam nodded, pulled out the recorder that had been running nearly non-stop since day 2. And wrapped it in flannel before slipping it into his pack like he was tucking in something alive. Hayes stood on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the line of trees like they might open and tell him something. He didn't say goodbye to the cabin. He didn't need to. He just turned toward the lake and started walking, slow and deliberate. We left the last basket of trout on the end of the dock, just like before. Wrapped in birch bark, twine knotted loose enough to pull away. Liam added a folded map, edges darkened by the stove's heat, with a red circle drawn over the clearing near the ravine, and the words, "We'll remember," scrawled in the corner. I added nothing, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think anything I left could match what had already been given. Leonard arrived just before noon, the buzz of his seaplane crawling over the trees like a fly that didn't belong. The sound felt wrong. Too mechanical, too fast, too human. Still, it meant home, or something like it. We loaded up slow, one duffel at a time, until there was nothing left on the dock but the gift we'd offered and the fog curling low around our boots. As the plane lifted off, I didn't look down. I looked ahead. And I listened, not for knocks, not for breathing, but for the feeling I'd carried with me since that night at the tree line. The feeling that something had watched me, and instead of chasing me off, had decided to wait. We never spoke of it again the way people think we would. We didn't go on podcasts. We didn't try to sell a book or make a documentary. The footage Liam had, whatever was on those tapes, he never released. He labeled them with a single word. Oh, what we did talk about sometimes over beers, sometimes in long drives with no music, were the small things. The smell right before the wind changed, the way snow seemed to carry sound differently out there, how it felt when something turned and didn't blink. Those were the pieces we kept, not proof, not stories, just the memory of knowing we were seen and allowed to leave anyway. A year later, Hayes sent an email. The cabin was untouched, the steps clean. No damage, No sign of animals. But the trout basket we'd left? Gone. Every piece, even the twine. The birch bark, he said, had been folded into a square and tucked between the porch boards, like a thank you note no one signed. He said he planned to go back again the next year. Maybe bring his nephew. Maybe alone. He didn't know yet. What he did know was this. The woods didn't forget you. Not when you came honestly. Not when you listened. As for me, I still wake up sometimes with the echo of something deep and slow in my chest. Like a sound I never fully heard but still remember. I walk more. I look up more. And sometimes, when I'm all alone and the wind dies just right, I say a quiet thank you to something I still can't name. I recorded this story not to prove anything. Not to scare anyone. But to scare aided it to exist somewhere outside my own head, somewhere other people might hear it, and understand that not all shadows are threats, and not every giant thing in the woods wants to hurt you. Some of them are just waiting to see what kind of person you are before they let you stay. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, thank you. I don't expect you to believe me. I only ask that, if you ever find yourself deep in the woods, where the quiet feels thick and the trees lean just a little too still, leave something behind. Something simple, something honest. And whatever's out there might just let you leave too. Out there in the stillness, beyond the noise, beyond the fences we build between what we understand and what we fear. Somewhere between myth and memory, there exists a space where the world feels older, wiser, and quieter than we allow ourselves to believe. And in that silence, something watches, not with cruelty, not even with curiosity, but with a kind of patience that only comes from knowing it has nothing left to prove. This story, in the end, was never about the wilderness itself. It was never about the hunt, or even the thing people claim to chase. It was about what happens when we stop trying to conquer and start learning how to belong. When we allow ourselves to stand still long enough for the wild to come to us. Not to harm, not to haunt, but simply to remind us that we are not the only ones who feel, who fear, who forgive. Sometimes, it takes being very far from the familiar to realize that respect doesn't need a shared language, that compassion isn't confined to species, that the greatest form of intelligence might not be invention or dominance, but restraint, and that the strongest thing any living being can do is to let another live. We walk through life collecting stories, hoping they will make us feel less alone. But some stories don't ask to be told. They ask to be held. Quietly. Quietly. And with reverence, because the truth they carry is not about facts or photographs, but about how we choose to carry ourselves in the presence of the unknown. So if this story moved something in you, if it stirred that quiet ache for wonder, for connection, for meaning, then thank you. Thank you for listening all the way through. It means more than you know. And if you'd like to keep walking with us into the strange, the sacred, and the not quite explained, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear what's still echoing in your heart after the last word fades. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and above all, stay listening.